Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's OSCE-wide Counter-Terrorism Conference in Vienna. Before opening the conference, we want to pay tribute to the victims of the horrible terrorist attack in Manchester. May I ask you to rise for a minute's silence? Thank you. Ministers, Commissioner, Special Representatives, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to welcome you to Austria and the 2017 Chairmanship OSCE-wide Counter-Terrorism Conference on preventing and countering violent extremism and radicalization that lead to terrorism. Austria is putting youth and the prevention of radicalization and terrorism at the center of our OSCE chairmanship. We conclude from today's impressive participation here that our partners share this priority. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to ask the OSCE chairperson in office, Foreign Minister Sebastian Kurz, to officially open our conference.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is another day with terrible news. Another day that begins with the question how people can commit such barbaric acts. I'm sure I speak in the name of all of us when I say our thoughts are with the families and friends of the victims, and we have to do everything possible to fight terrorism with all the means that we have. Not only in the UK, but all around the globe, radicalization and violent extremism leading to terrorism are an increasing threat to our societies. No country in the OSCE region is immune from radicalization and terrorism. Therefore, it is necessary to have these discussions in the OSCE. And this is why I'm very grateful to all high-level speakers for being here today. I want to especially thank Ms. Nadia Murad for being here today. She is a Yazidi woman who suffered the most horrifying and brutal experiences. As a UN Goodwill Ambassador, she will tell her story so that we can better understand where hatred and radicalization can lead to. Thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, we all have to realize that acts of religious extremism do not only happen in areas of conflict, but that there are extremists who radicalize our youth, even in the heart of our societies. More than 10,000 people from the OSCE area, among them 300 people from Austria, joined the so-called Islamic State in order to rape and kill in Syria, Iraq, and Libya. And these fighters not only cause terrible suffering in these countries, they also pose a threat to the security of the OSCE countries when they return to our societies. Radicalization and terrorism target and affect the internal stability of states, the rule of law and our basic freedoms, such as freedom of expression and the freedom of religion or belief. In the OSCE region, we face different dynamics of radicalization. But what they all have in common is that the most affected group are young people. Therefore, our focus needs to be on stopping those young people from being misled by radicals. Over the past months, we held 4 regional workshops with more than 50 young experts. They looked at the specific situations in Western Europe, the Black Sea area, the Western Balkans, and Central Asia. Let me just mention 3 common concerns that came out of the discussions. First, young people want and need to be included in strategies on countering violent extremism. Second, we need to develop measures to eliminate terrorist propaganda from social media and the internet. And third, there's a need for credible voices and stories as warning where radicalization can lead to. Professor Peter Neumann, my special representative against radicalization, is also preparing his recommendations on the fight against radicalization and violent extremism, and we will have the opportunity to discuss this matter further at the informal meeting of foreign ministers on 11 July. Ladies and gentlemen, besides these new forms from terrorism, we also still face old threats from terrorist organizations. For example, acts of terrorism by the PKK and the fight against them has claimed thousands of lives during the last years. Here, we cannot leave any room for doubt. We have to be clear in our rejection of these organizations and step up our efforts on an international and also on a national level. In order to combat terrorism effectively, we need to enhance regional and international cooperation. We need to work hard to prevent acts of terrorism through the fight against radicalization, but also by stopping the financing of terrorism. We need to protect our societies through police measures, exchange of relevant information, and better control of our borders. We need to ensure that we bring those responsible for terrorism to justice, and we must ensure that we have an effective crisis response in place when terrorism takes place or happens. Ladies and gentlemen, today's conference is an opportunity to listen and learn from each other's experiences. We all have to join forces in the fight against radicalization and terrorism. This is the only way to be successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Kurz, for your opening speech. I now would like to pass the floor to the permanent representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, Secretary-General, colleagues, I thank you from my heart for your mark of respect this morning for the victims of the terrorist attack in Manchester, for your many kind words and expressions of condolence and solidarity. Indeed, Minister, this is another day that begins with terrible news. This was another attack on the innocent, on our young people and our children. Our thoughts this morning are first and foremost with the victims, with their families and friends, and with those helping them and dealing with the aftermath of this terrible crime. Such attacks do not and will not succeed in sowing division or undermining our open, democratic way of life. I would like to quote a British civil society organisation called Tell Mama, who this morning have said, "Let us stand together against extremists. They will not divide us." This sad event underlines the importance of the issues that we will be discussing here today. So I ask that all of us here keep today the victims of this and other terrorist attacks very much in the front of our minds, and that we focus our work on how we can make a real difference so that fewer people are led into violent extremism and so that fewer innocent lives are lost. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to introduce today's keynote speakers. First, I turn to Julian King, the European Commissioner for the Security Union. Commissioner King has held a number of high-ranking positions in the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office and in Brussels before he was appointed European Commissioner for the Security Union in September 2016. Commissioner, may I ask you to hold your speech, please?
Thank you. Ministers, Secretary-General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Over the past 2 years, almost a dozen OSCE states have fallen victim to terrorist attacks. Just this January, Austrian authorities arrested a man who was planning an attack on the subway here in Vienna. These attacks are not just attacks against individual countries, but on the values we share, on the way we live our lives. Again, overnight, we've been reminded how present this challenge is. Our response needs to be collective. Thank you for inviting me today to this meeting at the OSCE, an opportunity to underline the importance of international coordination in the face of these threats. As the EU Security Commissioner, I very much appreciate the welcome that we've had here and the decision to organize this conference on preventing violent extremism and radicalization leading to terrorism. It is an excellent choice of the Austrian chairmanship of the OSCE. The OSCE is a highly valued partner in our common fight against terrorism, rooted in a shared belief that upholding human rights and strengthening civil society are integral to effective counter-terrorism efforts. With our shared regional focus, the OSCE and the EU not only complement but reinforce each other's work, particularly in the Western Balkans and Central Asia. We warmly welcome the declarations and decisions of the ministerial councils in Hamburg, Belgrade and Bern, and embrace the principles and the priorities and actions that are set out there. My role as a Security Union Commissioner sends a clear message that the transnational threats we face to our common security, whether from terrorism or organized crime or indeed cybercrime, require a response which corresponds to their growing dimension. In the European Union, we're working on 2 fronts. First, to close down the space in which terrorists and criminals and cybercriminals operate and deny them the means, money, munitions, movement. That includes working on preventing terrorism and violent extremism, countering radicalization that can lead to terrorism, and increasing our cybersecurity. Secondly, also building our resilience, strengthening our information systems by closing information gaps and making them more joined up, and strengthening critical infrastructure, particularly transport, energy, and again, on cybersecurity. We firmly support the capacity building work of the OSCE on all of these issues, carried out both here in Vienna and through the OSCE field missions, a key contribution to achieving our common goals, including those agreed at the UN level. In the EU, we've recently adopted several pieces of legislation that, once implemented by our member states, will help reinforce our collective response to terrorism. A directive on combating terrorism that criminalizes training and travel for the purpose of terrorism and the financing of such actions. Toughen rules on money laundering, making it harder to illicitly smuggle funds across borders. And we're also working on making it harder to misuse prepaid credit cards and other forms of virtual payment. The revision of the Schengen Border Code to enhance security at the European Union's external borders, to allow for systematic checks on all travellers, including EU passport holders, coming in and out of our shared space. The EU Passenger Name Record Directive, adopted last year, which will make it easier to detect the movement of foreign terrorist fighters. The revision of the Firearms Directive, which will remove the most dangerous military-grade arms from wider circulation, making it more difficult to acquire and possess such dangerous weapons. But we certainly need to go further. Recent terrorist attacks have highlighted the urgent need for our information systems to be interoperable, to eliminate current blind spots where terrorist suspects can be recorded in different unconnected databases under different aliases. Getting the best out of our various information systems for security, border and migration management will help ensure that those on the front line, border guards, law enforcement officers, immigration officials and the judicial authorities have the information they need to do their jobs. Sharing information about foreign terrorist fighters and other terrorist threats will make our citizens safer. But it isn't the whole story. We also need to work on prevention to help stop radicalization in the first place. I'm delighted that you've chosen this issue as your main theme for today's conference. A lot has already been done by the OSCE and the EU to reinforce our efforts to combat terrorism. However, preventing violent extremism and radicalization leading to extremism is a difficult long-term challenge. In particular, tackling radicalization in our communities requires a concerted and sustained effort. That's why the EU, through the Radicalization Awareness Network, is funding work by local practitioners, teachers, healthcare providers, social workers, prison officers, those best placed to identify the early warning signs of radicalization and to help address them. We believe this could be a best practice model for other regions within the OSCE and would be happy to support initiatives going in that direction. National governments also have a key role to play in ensuring that effective strategies for countering violent extremism are in place to provide the framework to support local practitioners on the ground. In the EU, we've recently launched the network of Prevent policymakers to strengthen and institutionalize the exchange of expertise and experiences on prevention approaches and policies across the member states and to involve member states more directly in managing the Radicalization Awareness Network activities. The Commission, based on the work done by the Radicalization Awareness Network, will present next month a manual on returnee responses in order to provide guidance and best practice to member states in handling this very difficult challenge of dealing with returnees. Not only returning foreign terrorist fighters, but also women and children. The internet is a crucial tool in fighting radicalization. Many of the perpetrators who conducted the attacks over the last year or so underwent a rapid process of radicalization, accelerated and facilitated by online terrorist content. That's why the European Union launched the Internet Forum in 2015 to help us crack down on online propaganda. This forum brings together ministers from across the EU, as well as key representatives from the internet industry. And we've established an internet referral unit at Europol in order to scan for terrorist material in the online public domain, rapidly refer it to the companies for them to remove it. Some of the largest internet companies have committed to developing a database of hashes which allows content to be identified and tagged as propaganda, marked electronically, preventing it from being reposted. Reducing access to terrorist content online is only part of the answer. We also need to counter and undermine the terrorist narrative by providing positive alternatives. To support this effort, we've launched a civil society empowerment program to equip civil society partners with the necessary skills and technical expertise to provide positive alternative narratives online. I'd like to encourage further exchanges of best practice in counter and alternative narratives between the EU and the OSCE. I'd also like to underline the importance of empowering young people to take an active role in offering alternatives to extremism. I'd like to congratulate the OSCE on the work done on policy recommendations on preventing violent extremism formulated in May this year by a group of young experts in Sarajevo. At the EU level, we have launched within the Radicalization Awareness Network a group called RAN Young that is pursuing similar objectives, and we can certainly work together to reinforce our efforts. Last but not least, we are, together with the OSCE, working on supporting the fight against radicalization in third countries and partner countries. I'd particularly mention here the Western Balkans, where a lot of work has been done within the EU Western Balkan Counter-Terrorism Initiative, and support for the First Line project aimed at raising awareness and encouraging capacity building. Fighting extremism means bringing different communities together, increasing their resilience and empowering them to isolate and marginalize those who advocate violent extremism, as well as helping those who might be tempted by the siren calls of violence. It's about bringing people together. And for me, listening to the words of the head of Greater Manchester Police speaking this morning, I found it very powerful when he said, "Terrorists attempt to disrupt our lives and create distrust and fear across our communities. In response, we should stand together." Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner King. I now turn to Nadia Murad, who has reacted to her own tragic suffering from terrorism in Iraq by calling on the world to end these horrors. For her impressive fight for the victims of terrorism, slavery and trafficking, she was nominated both for the Nobel Peace Prize and as Goodwill Ambassador to the United Nations for the dignity of survivors of human trafficking. Madame Murad, can I ask you for your speech, please?
السيدات والسادة، السيد الوزير كورس.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Minister Kors,
أشكركم على دعوتكم الكريمة لي للتحدث إليكم اليوم. أنا ممتنة من دولة نمسا لقرارها بتسليط الضوء على إجراءات مكافحة الإرهاب، وخلال رئاستها لمنظمة الأمن والتعاون في أوروبا. كما أشكركم على تنظيم هذا المؤتمر المهم.
thank you for your kind invitation to speak to you today. I am grateful to the state of Austria and its decision to highlight actions of counter-terrorism and prevention during its OSCE chairmanship, and thank you for organizing this event.
العديد من الناس المتميزين وذوي الخبرة تجمعوا هنا اليوم للحديث عن الإرهاب وكيف يمكن التعامل معه وكيف يمكن منعه.
Many distinguished and experienced people are gathered here today to talk about terrorism, how it can be dealt with, and how it might be prevented.
هذا موضوع مهم أكثر أهمية من أي وقت مضى، حيث وصل الإرهاب إلى كل ركن من أركان الأرض، من وطن العراق إلى بيتي وبلدي الجديد ألمانيا. في هذا الصباح دعاؤنا ودعمنا مع عوائل الضحايا في حادث الإرهاب الذي وقع في مدينة مانشستر في بريطانيا مساء أمس.
This is an important topic, more important than ever, as terrorism has reached every corner of the earth, from my own homeland, Iraq, to my new home, Germany. And just this morning, our thoughts and prayers are with the victims of yesterday's terrorist attack and their families in Manchester, UK.
أعمال الإرهاب بغض النظر عن مكان ارتكابها لا يمكن تبريرها أبداً، لا بالدين ولا بالقومية ولا بأي فلسفة، فلا يمكن أن يكون قتل المدنيين الأبرياء مقبولاً.
Acts of terrorism, no matter where they are perpetrated, can never be justified, not by religion, nor by nationalism, nor by any philosophy. Can the murder of innocent civilians be acceptable?
إن تكاليف الإرهاب عالية جداً. الإرهاب يغير أساليب حياة المجتمعات، يضعف الروابط الاجتماعية والثقافية بين المجتمعات المحلية، يشرد ملايين الأشخاص من منازلهم كل عام، يهدد اقتصادات الدول، يعرض السلام والحرية والديمقراطية للخطر.
The costs of terrorism are high. Terrorism is changing our community's way of life, weakening social and cultural ties between communities, displacing millions of people from their homes every year, threatening economies and regional development, endangering peace, freedom, and democracy, destabilizing our countries.
ولكن التكلفة البشرية هي أكثر النتائج تدميراً من قبل الإرهاب. الآلاف من الأرواح البريئة التي تضيع شهرياً بسبب الإرهاب، وآلاف العوائل تترك لتعيش مع مأساة الموت والحزن على أحبائهم.
But it is the human cost that is the most devastating consequences of terrorism. The thousands of innocent lives being lost every month and families left to live with the tragic death of loved ones.
إن الإرهاب لا يأتي من لا مكان. الإرهابيون كانوا أشخاص مثلي ومثلكم، ولكنهم قد غسلت أدمغتهم وأصبحوا متطرفين وجاهزين لقتل أنفسهم وقتل الناس الأبرياء.
Terrorism doesn't come from nowhere. Terrorists were people like you and me, but they have been brainwashed and radicalized to kill innocent people as well as themselves.
العديد من العوامل يمكن أن تدفع الأفراد نحو الأصولية. يجب أن تركز جزء من الحل لهذه المشكلة على تشخيص من يدعمون الإرهاب والتطرف. نحن بحاجة إلى معرفة البلدان التي تدعم هذه الحركات الإرهابية الخطيرة في جميع أنحاء العالم. ما هي الحكومات التي تمول الجماعات الإرهابية؟ من الذي يجمعهم؟ من الذي ينشر هذه الكراهية والعنف؟
Many factors can drive individuals toward fundamentalism. Part of the solution must surely focus on identifying those who supported terrorism and extremism. We need to know which countries are supporting these dangerous terrorist movements around the world, which governments are funding terrorist groups, who is gathering them, who is spreading this hatred and violence.
بإمكان رجال الدين القيام بأدوار أساسية في الكفاح ضد التطرف. عليهم أن يعززوا السلام والتعايش وأن يقفوا ضد الأصولية. يجب أن لا تستخدم أي دين كغذاء للظلم. لا يمكن للدين أبداً أن يبرر الجرائم ضد خلق الله.
Religious leaders can play essential role in the struggle against extremism. They must promote peace and coexistence and stand against fundamentalism. We must not let religion be the veil for injustice. Religion can never justify atrocities against God's creations.
الكثير من النساء مثلي أصبحوا ضحايا التعذيب والعنف الجنسي على يد الإرهابيين.
Young women like myself have been the victims of torture and sexual violence at the hand of terrorists.
ولكن يجري أيضاً توجيه النساء بصورة متزايدة نحو التطرف، حيث يتم تجنيدهن إلى الجماعات الإرهابية. يتزوجن من زعماء ومقاتلين الإرهاب، يستخدمونهم كدروع بشرية وجواسيس ومجندات، وبالتالي فإنهم تدعمن أدامة التطرف.
But young women are also being increasingly drawn toward extremism, lured into terrorist groups, married to leaders and fighters, used as human shields, spies, and also recruiters. Thus, they perpetuate the cycle of extremism.
المجتمع الإيزيدي عانى ولا يزال يعاني من أكبر الفظائع التي لا يمكن أن يتصورها العقل البشري. كان عمري 21 عاماً في أغسطس آب 2014 عندما هاجمت مقاتلي ما يسمى بالدولة الإسلامية في سنجار شمال العراق، وقتلوا معظم عائلتي والآلاف من العوائل الإيزيدية الأخرى، وأخذونا نحن النساء والأطفال الإيزيديين كعبيداً لهم.
My people, the Yazidi community, face it and still suffer the most violent atrocities you can think of. I was 21 years old in August 2014 when fighters of the so-called Islamic State overran our areas, killed most of my family and thousands of other Yazidi families, and took us, the Yazidi women, as their slaves.
إبادتنا لا زالت مستمرة أمام إنذار العالم منذ ما يقارب 3 سنوات. لا تزال الآلاف من نساؤنا وأطفالنا يواجهون أشد أنواع الجرائم تحت أيادي داعش. لا تزال أكثر من 85% من مجتمعنا يعيشون كنازحين في ظروف بائسة في المخيمات.
Our genocide is ongoing since nearly 3 years before the eyes of the international community. Thousands of our women and children are still facing the most severe crimes under the hands of Islamic State. More than 80% of our community are still live as IDPs in the miserable situation in camps.
لا تزال عظام أمي وأخواني والآلاف من الضحايا في المقابر الجماعية مبعثرة في سنجار بدون حماية. لا تزال مناطقنا المحررة غير صالحة للعيش، بل أصبحت مناطق نزاع بين القوى المحلية والإقليمية والدولية.
The bones of my mother and thousands of other victims in tens of mass graves are still scattered in Sinjar without any protection. Our liberated areas remain uninhabitable and have become zones for conflict between local, regional and international powers.
دراسة حديثة بأن داعش قام بقتل واختطاف أكثر من 10,000 مواطن يزيدي في اليوم المأساوي من آب عام 2014. مجموعات من الأقليات الأخرى في المنطقة تم مهاجمتهم على أساس هويتهم الدينية وأجبروهم على ترك منازلهم. أكثر من 1,000,000 شخص نزحوا من مدينة نينوى بسبب هجمات داعش.
A recent study found that almost 10,000 Yazidis were either killed or kidnapped by Daesh over a matter of few days in August 2014. Other religious minority groups in the region were also attacked on the basis of their religious identity and forced to flee their homes. More than 1 million people from Mosul were displaced by ISIS attacks.
مع كل هذه الجرائم والإبادة المستمرة لم يواجه أي من الجنات للعدالة إلى يومنا هذا.
With all these crimes and this ongoing genocide, the perpetrators have not faced justice until today.
تقديم الإرهابيين إلى العدالة وأعطاء إشارة قوية إلى العالم بأن هذه الجرائم سوف تتم ملاحقتها قضائياً هي أيضاً خطوة للوقاية من الإرهاب. مثل هذه الخطوة ستمنع الآخرين من اللجوء إلى الإرهاب من خلال معرفتهم بأن الجنات لن يفلتوا من العقاب.
Bringing terrorists to justice and giving a strong signal to all the world that these crimes will be legally prosecuted is also a measure of prevention. Such step will discourage others from turning to terrorism and ensuring they know that the criminals will not be granted impunity.
كل الدول في أوروبا والعالم لديها القدرة على إنشاء محاكم محلية لمتابعة القضايا القانونية ضد عودة المقاتلين من داعش الأجانب. أنني ممتنة لدولة مثل ألمانيا لبدء مثل هذه الخطوة.
Every state in Europe, every nation in the world has the ability to establish domestic legal cases against returning ISIS fighters. I am grateful that countries like Germany have already started such process.
مع المحامية أمل كلوني سأوصل الطلب من أجل إنشاء نظام دولي لمقاضة مرتكبي جرائم ضد الإنسانية والإبادة الجماعية.
Together with my lawyer Amal Cloney, I will continue to ask for an international system to prosecute the criminals of these crimes against humanity and genocide.
بدون حماية أو دعم دولي العيش في مناطقنا مرة ثانية تكاد تكون مستحيلة. كيف يمكننا أن نعيش جنبا إلى جنب مع أولئك الذين خانونا، مع أولئك الذين انضموا إلى داعش وشاركوا في قتل رجالنا واختطاف نسائنا وأطفالنا، مع جيراننا السابقين الذين أيدوا داعش وشجعوا الإبادة الجماعية؟ كيف يمكننا أن نثق بتلك القوات التي كانت مسؤولة عن أمننا وتخلت عنا؟
Without an international protection or support, it is almost impossible to live again in our areas. How can we live together side by side with those who betrayed us, with those who joined ISIS and participated in the murder of our men and kidnapping of our women and children, with our former neighbors who supported or encouraged the genocide? How can we trust those forces who were responsible for our security and abandoned us?
فلنحاول معا منع التطرف بين الأطفال والنساء والرجال. دعونا نتخذ إجراءات لمحاسبة الإرهابيين عن جرائمهم ولنبين لهم ولإنصارهم والدول الداعمة لهم أنه لن يكون هناك إفلات من العقاب، وهذه هي الطريقة الوحيدة التي يمكننا بها بناء مستقبل أكثر سلما للأجيال القادمة. وشكرا لكم.
Let's try to prevent the radicalization of children, of women and men. Let us take action to hold terrorists accountable for their crimes and show them and their status supporters that there will be no impunity. It is the only way that we can build a more peaceful future for our next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Murad. Ladies and gentlemen, I now would like to introduce Professor Peter Neumann. He is the Special Representative of the OSCE Chairmanship in Office on Countering Radicalization and Violent Extremism. He is an outstanding expert and academic on the phenomenon of extremism, radicalization and terrorism. He is teaching at the King's College in London, and he founded an institute dedicated to scientific research dealing exactly with the topic of our 2 days conference. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there's 2 questions I want to address today. Why does it matter, and what needs to be done? Whenever I visit a country to talk about terrorism, people tell me it's a very limited problem. Very few people, nothing compared to the vast number of peaceful members of the community who are good citizens who want nothing more than a good life for themselves and their families. And that's, of course, true. It's true in Britain, it's true in Sweden, it's true in France, in Russia, or any of the countries that have recently experienced terrorist attacks. But it's in many ways exactly the point of terrorism. Terrorism allows a very small number of people who do not represent anyone to have an extraordinary impact on society. The terrorists know that they cannot conquer France. They don't have an air force, they don't have a navy, they don't have the troops that are necessary to defeat a real country that is a member of the OSCE. What they can do is to mess with our minds. They can make us fear. They can make us suspicious of each other. They can make us lose trust in other people, members of our own communities. Terrorism is not necessarily about killing a lot of people. It is about creating terror. Look at what 3 or 4 terrorist attacks in France, for example, have achieved. French society, as we've seen over past months, is more polarized, more divided, more fragile than ever before. The extremes have become stronger than ever before. And that's not because of a mass movement. It's not because millions of people on the streets. It's because of the actions of a few dozen. And if that can happen to a country like France, with strong institutions, a very long history, imagine what terrorism can do to some of the countries that are younger, with more brittle institutions, where the fault lines of recent conflicts haven't completely healed. So yes, terrorism is not a mass movement, neither in Britain nor anywhere else. It is always just a few people. But it doesn't take a lot of people to create a lot of destruction. And I mean not just physical destruction, but also psychological and political destruction. And that brings me to my second question: what needs to be done? Now, of course, we need competent and professional security agencies. We need the right laws, decisive action. We need effective cooperation within countries and across borders. But in my view, the moment that security agencies have to deal with terrorism, in many respects, it's already too late. Police and intelligence services are firefighters. They are the ones who are turning up when the house is already on fire. Lots of houses are on fire at the same time. They may no longer be able to cope. So when thinking about counter-terrorism, let's not just think about firefighting. Let's also talk about how we can stop those fires from starting in the first place. And that's what prevention is about. We need to look at every element of the cycle of radicalization. Radicalization is driven by political conflicts, ethnic and sectarian fault lines, by frustration and grievances, or the perception of grievances. Let's talk about what we can do to address them. Radicalization is underpinned by ideas and ideologies. Let's think about the most effective counter-narratives and the credible voices that articulate them. If radicalization is about people, if it is about social processes, about cliques and charismatic leaders, let's come up with projects that work with the people who can stop them. Parents, teachers, role models. If radicalization is happening in specific places, be it in prisons or on the internet, what are the stories of successful initiatives that are trying to deny those spaces to the extremists? My role as special representative is to identify countries that have a lot of experience and match them up with countries that don't, but who would benefit from gaining it. I will produce a comprehensive report with very concrete suggestions and examples by the end of the year, recognizing that this is a challenge that affects all of us, that no country can completely isolate itself from what happens in its neighborhood, that we all benefit from strengthening each other's resilience. But there's one last thing that is important to me, and it's important beyond everything I've just said. In a way, it's a limitation of the entire approach. When we speak about countering violent extremism or countering terrorism, our efforts are, by definition, against something. They are negative. But the more I reflect on my work as an academic and now in this perhaps more diplomatic role, the more I realize that just being against something is never going to be enough to give a society true resilience. There was a well-known British philosopher, Isaiah Berlin. He wrote a famous essay on freedom that I had to read as a student, and that stuck with me. And he said there are two types of freedom. There are freedoms from, and there are freedoms to. There are negative freedoms, and there are positive freedoms. To have freedom from is very important. Freedom from oppression, freedom from hatred, freedom from hunger, from fear, from violence, or the threat of violence. It's a precondition for a functioning society, but it is not enough. To create real freedom, or in our case, a truly resilient society, you also have to create positive freedoms. You need to work on a positive vision of what you want your society to be. It's not enough to be against violent extremism. We're all against ISIS. Maybe we can create a counter-narrative that shows why ISIS is bad, why they are corrupt, why they are liars, how they are distorting Islam. And that's important and it can be effective. But ultimately, unless we also work on a positive vision of what our societies can offer people who are attracted by ISIS, unless we give them something they can truly be part of, unless we do that, we will never address the ultimate causes of violent extremism, and we'll end up with the same problem in a different guise. Yesterday it was Al-Qaeda, today it is ISIS, tomorrow it may be something else. So if there's one hope I have for this conference, it is that for sure we'll come up with ideas for how to counter violent extremism, but that part of that conversation also has to go beyond it, because ultimately countering violent extremism should and must be about creating a better society. And where better to have that conversation about security, cooperation, and a positive vision of society than the OSCE. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Neumann. I now would like to ask His Excellency Secretary General Lamberto Zannier for his opening remarks and to take on the moderation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Minister Kurz, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you also from my part to this high-level segment of the 2017 OSCE-wide Counter-Terrorism Conference. With more than 550 participants, the turnout this year is impressive. High-level representatives from 67 OSCE participating states and partners for cooperation and 35 international organizations have joined us, along with an impressive number of representatives from civil society organizations and the academic sector. A year ago, I reported to OSCE participating states on past, current and future activities of OSCE field operations in preventing and countering violent extremism and radicalization that lead to terrorism, VERTL. My report noted that much had been achieved, but more activities would follow. Let me give you some examples which highlight also the broad spectrum of initiatives we are undertaken in the field. The OSCE mission to Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has organized several youth outreach and capacity building initiatives for local stakeholders, has provided targeted support to the Islamic community to engage with some 1,000 imams in addressing the threat of violent extremism. The OSCE mission to Serbia is promoting a community policing approach to preventing and countering VERTL, including cooperation with municipal safety councils and civil society organizations, and the development of a country-wide training for community police officers. The OSCE mission in Kosovo is providing a whole-of-society dialogue and cooperation at the local level to prevent and counter VERTL, including through the development of a youth network. The OSCE Center in Bishkek has organized training for journalists to promote professional reporting on terrorism and violent extremism. The OSCE office in Tajikistan supports the rollout of a nationwide Parents Against Terrorism initiative to raise awareness at the community level and is working with youth to improve their resilience against violent narratives. And the OSCE Program Office in Astana has engaged law enforcement, border guard and security service officials, together with civil society experts and young leaders in international conferences and training seminars to prevent and counter violent extremism and radicalization. At the level of the Secretariat, much of our efforts have been focused on the implementation of the OSCE Leaders Against Intolerance and Violent Extremism initiative, LIVE, which aims at encouraging and coaching civil society leaders at local levels to speak out and take action against violent extremism. We have piloted and will soon finalize a training course for youth leaders, which will be rolled out in the fall, in parallel to developing a training course for women leaders. We have continued to promote a gender-sensitive approach to preventing and countering VERTL, which has been a key focus for us since 2011. We also plan to conduct tabletop exercises, which are an effective way of engaging multiple stakeholders to enhance collaboration in addressing the foreign terrorist fighters phenomenon and violent extremism and radicalization. Finally, I would like to underscore the remarkable success of our OSCE-wide communication campaign, OSCE United in Countering Violent Extremism, or #UnitedCVE, under the banner of which we are gathered today. The campaign has reached over 26 million people on social media since its launch 2 years ago, thanks to hundreds of social media posts and over 35 video testimonials. During this conference, we are launching a social media challenge for young people. Under the #DailyThrills, we're inviting them to share with us how they channel their passion and energy and their need for recognition in a positive way. This social media challenge will give young people the opportunity to show the many constructive alternatives that exist to violent extremist messages. We will continue to engage with youth, tapping into their extraordinary creativity to enliven and enhance our local, regional and global efforts in preventing and countering violent extremism and radicalization. Too many young people from all over the world are still recruited by terrorist organizations. This means that we have a lot more to do to reach out to youth and listen to what they have to say in order to rally them to our cause of promoting and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms, as well as peace, security and cooperation. Let me now welcome and briefly introduce the very distinguished panelists for this high-level segment. I would start with His Excellency Ian Iambon, who is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Security and Internal Affairs of the Kingdom of Belgium. Prior to this, he was a member of the Federal Parliament, Chairman of the Parliamentary Group Community of Brass Hat, and Mayor. And he also has a distinguished career in the business community before becoming actively involved in politics. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the Austrian Chairmanship and the OSCE Transnational Threats Department for the organization of this very important conference and for inviting me here today in Vienna. The events in Manchester last night prove once again the importance of conferences like this. As former speakers already said, our thoughts are with the victims and their families. But I would like to inform you on how we organize the fight against terrorism and violent extremism in Belgium. I've been the Belgian Minister of Security and the Interior for over 2.5 years, and all this time a persistent terrorist threat was looming. We reached rock bottom when a double bombing took place on March 22nd of last year, both in the airport of Zaventem and in a subway station of Brussels. More than 30 people lost their lives as a result of these attacks. But also with regards to the attacks in Paris, 6 months prior to that, clear connections with our country could be established. Some perpetrators grew up in the problem areas of Brussels. For more than 2 years now, our police and intelligence departments are working to eradicate the terrorist cell that was active both in Brussels and in Paris. Furthermore, our government has taken as much as 40 measures in order to tighten as much as possible the web around terrorism suspects. We have invested an additional $1 billion in our intelligence departments. We have strengthened the legislation on terrorism. We made sure that our intelligence departments work closer together and share information on foreign fighters more easily. We have introduced more rigorous controls, for instance, by using smart cameras and other technological applications. We have legally embedded the PNR system in our country, and the list goes on and on. I suppose I don't have to convince anyone that in this process, international cooperation is key. But what I want to point out today is that the most important point is avoiding violent extremism. That story is much more complicated and more difficult to deal with than a policy focused solely on security issues. Prevention, ladies and gentlemen, is a social challenge and daunting task for all of us in the years to come. It deals with education, family policy and integration. We only succeed if we're able to reconquer the hearts of youngsters and newcomers living in the problem areas of our big cities. That's only possible when our story of values and standards, let's say our model of society, is not just explained, but also sufficiently compelling. In our federal state, the prevention policy falls within the political competence of our communities. As Federal Minister of Interior, I don't have direct authority over that aspect. However, what I strongly encourage is to make sure we detect the signals at an early stage. What I mean is this: we need to detect the signals of youngsters who are radicalizing as soon as possible in order for our police forces to respond quickly on the basis of these signals. I would like to tell you more on how we do that in real life. Violence can be preached everywhere, at school, in the youth club, at work, but also behind the computer. The point is that as policymakers, we ought to develop an efficient network with sensors or radars monitoring at all these places. Now, no thought-reading police, most certainly not, but a subtle radar detection system making it possible for people exhibiting suspicious behavior and or displaying violent extremist features to be noticed by their close relatives. It is that network of premature detection and identification that we are implementing since a few years in Belgium. The building blocks of this network are the so-called local integrated security cells. The goal is to make sure that each municipality in Belgium eventually has such a cell. 284 already have one. That is almost half of all Belgian municipalities. Such a cell is always composed of representatives of various departments, social services, welfare organizations, umbrella organizations representing various schools, prevention workers of municipalities, but also members of the local police force. In each municipality, these people physically gather on a regular basis, the mayor usually being the chairman. During these meetings, a discussion can be held in a discreet manner on youngsters who, for instance, behave in a strange way and for whom individual action programs need to be set up. We are currently finalizing a legal framework regarding professional confidentiality, allowing people who participate at these conversations to share information. This is, of course, important because the point is to exchange confidential information during such meetings. The goal should always be to look after youngsters and adjust their behavior when they risk straying from the right path. This can, for instance, be accomplished by accompanying them on the basis of de-radicalization programs. But, if needed, the local police can also involve the other intelligence departments on the basis of the information that was gathered. There should be no doubt about this. Whoever radicalizes in such a manner that he or she becomes a danger to society will closely be monitored by the Belgian intelligence departments. This is, for instance, possible when the community police officer pays that person a visit on a regular basis. We call it the integrated approach. My message is clear. It's important to get youngsters who are prone to hate speeches and to violence preached by ISIS on the radar as quickly as possible, by putting up a network of social inspection. It is a very complex and subtle exercise, but the results that we are achieving in Belgium are very promising. This approach has become all the more important since ISIS has changed its modus operandi. The attacks in Brussels and Paris were still the work of fighters lured to the caliphate to be trained as ticking time bombs. Nowadays, ISIS is focusing on so-called homegrown terrorists, youngsters living in problem areas who are being seduced by hate speeches and operate as lone wolves to target our Western civilization. But the term lone wolves is actually very deceiving. People are always nestled in social environments. The past decennia, we have evolved towards an extremely diversified society, but we didn't manage that diversity very well. Too often we thought it's all going to turn out fine, but the societal model is just like the business model of a company. You need to be at it on a day-to-day basis, lest it collapses. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to cherish and externalize our model of society and make sure that our youngsters find their place within that model. It's a long-term undertaking, but as policymakers, we don't have a choice. Letting things slide is no option. As a society, we have to take and keep matters into our hands, while being mindful and showing sound involvement. That's the only way to develop a successful prevention policy. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, and let me now welcome His Excellency Dragan Mektic, who has been Minister for Security of Bosnia and Herzegovina since 2015. Before that, Mr. Mektic served as the Deputy Minister for Security and previously as Director of the Immigration Service. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Distinguished Chairman, Your Excellencies, Honourable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the OSCE for organising and inviting us to this conference. It is my great pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to say something about this topic of great importance to our country as well as to the countries of the region. Extremism has existed throughout history and it has been experienced differently in different political systems. What constituted extremism in one socio-political community was not seen the same way in another. Timing the influence of various cultural, religious, and customary norms, as well as identification with related terms such as terrorism, radicalism, fundamentalism, and fanaticism, also make a study of the phenomenon of extremism more complex. Given that there are several significant problems in the attempts to arrive at a theoretical definition of extremism, one should first consider that this phenomenon, which is not purely political, can be equally manifested in different spheres of society. We face extremism in culture, in sport, art, and in religion, while its destructive nature is at its most prominent when expressed in its violent form. Of all kinds of extremism, the most dangerous is violent extremism because it can have major ramifications for society. Violent extremism always arises from ideological intentions. If there is no ideological motivation or objective, then we cannot talk about violent extremism. Not distinguishing extremism from related phenomena such as terrorism, radicalism, fundamentalism, and fanaticism is another stumbling block in its conceptual definition. First of all, we do need to say that all terrorism is extremism at the same time, but not necessarily vice versa. Indeed, terrorism is extremism in action. When we talk about the relationship between extremism and radicalism, a major problem is the fact that in most cases, these phenomena are considered synonymous. However, a clear line of separation should be drawn between radicalism and extremism. As the meaning of radicalism can be related to deep-rooted changes in society, it is clear that it does not coincide with extremism, the meaning of which we have already spoken of. Radicalism can be interpreted in two ways. One, as a return to the roots in terms of returning to the old, so usually retrograde, or as rooted in recovery, which may imply a degree of novelty. Thus, if something is radical, it does not mean that it is regressive. On the contrary, it can have a progressive meaning. In this context, unlike extremism, which is always negative, radicalism can also have a positive meaning. Examples of radical changes that have brought very positive results to society are the granting of voting rights to women or the process of decolonization. Determining extremism is equally difficult from a legal point of view, which, as a result, makes it difficult to fight against various extremist groups, even if they are ready to demolish the state order. Criminal legislation should explicitly treat each extremist act as a criminal offence, such as hate crime, terrorism, or the like. Although the academic definition of extremism is still not precise, extremism can be identified by violence, i.e., the latent readiness for violence as well as its very destructive characteristics. It is therefore of great importance to analyse extremism in detail and to identify the possible causes as well as the possible appearance of its forms. In order to counteract this phenomenon in an efficient and sustainable manner, it is necessary to act in accordance with the rule of law and international human rights standards. The state's reaction to the threat of violent extremism should be based on evidence and be proportionate in order to avoid a loss of public trust or support, as well as victimization or other forms of unintentionally legitimizing extremist narratives. In addition, it cannot be limited to repressive measures aimed at pursuing terrorists, depriving them of material capabilities or preventing them from implementing their plans. The usual suppression of terrorism by law enforcement and intelligence agencies should be complemented by prevention measures, such as observing the conditions that favour the spread of violent extremism. Consequently, there is a need to look at different social, economic, political, and other factors that deepen the conditions in which the extremist groups recruit others, as well as extensive multidisciplinary measures to identify the conditions conducive to violent extremism. Ladies and gentlemen, Bosnia and Herzegovina is not spared these phenomena, and on our own territory we are faced with the same threats that are characteristic to the whole region and Europe. The new dynamics of violent extremism, whose fundamental characteristics are above all extreme variability and unpredictability, are an additional challenge for our intelligence and security structures. Over the past few years, we have recognized that only coordinated and synchronized actions can yield optimal results. In accordance with the objectives of the BIH security policy document, as well as national strategies in the field of combating terrorism, organised crime, drugs abuse, and illegal trade in arms, Bosnia and Herzegovina gives exceptional significance to the systematic building of trust and cooperation measures with other countries, especially those in Europe. Bosnia and Herzegovina is of the opinion that cooperation amongst states is particularly significant in the context of the burning issues of violent extremism, radicalism, terrorism, and organised crime. Thus, these security threats merit our full dedication and attention. Practical cases indicate that organised crime groups increasingly cooperate and carry out their activities across borders, and the dynamics of the new terrorist threats, especially those related to foreign terrorist fighters and violent extremism, follow the same trend. As we know, no country is able to fight these challenges alone. Therefore, activities at the bilateral level between neighbouring countries, but also within regional fora, are particularly significant for further confidence building and for the purpose of operational information exchange and criminal legal assistance and cooperation. In the context of our national efforts in building capacity to combat the identified security challenges, we would like to emphasise the following. Updating the strategy for preventing and combating terrorism, which aims to open up new opportunities for stronger preventive action against violent radicalism and extremism, as well as to intensify the overall cooperation with other countries in the fight against this security challenge. Preventing money laundering and the financing of terrorism in accordance with Moneyval and FATF requirements, particularly in terms of further building legislative and operational capacity, as well as the improvement of regulatory mechanisms and mechanisms for the early identification of illegal activities and the seizure of assets gained through criminal activities. Uniting all anti-terrorism actions through a system of coordination from the highest level and through the Counter-Terrorism Task Force, which is led by the Chief Prosecutor of the Prosecutor's Office of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Unified Analytical Centre for Processing All Data established at the State Investigation and Protection Agency, which is part of our Ministry of Security. Efficient and rapid cooperation between the judicial and policing authorities, combined use of measures that are preventive and repressive, zero tolerance towards all forms of extremism, especially violent extremism, unconditional compliance with international standards, the principle of the rule of law and human rights, and the implementation of all anti-terrorist activities and measures. Strengthening the capacities of police and judicial structures to cooperate with other countries, in particular via Interpol and Europol channels, once the operational agreement on data exchange is signed. From 2012 until the end of 2014, Bosnia and Herzegovina was seriously affected by the phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters. Over that period, more than 250 of our citizens travelled to Syria and other conflict zones to join terrorist organisations. The provisions of the criminal code related to the criminalisation of foreign terrorist fighters, those entered into force in mid-2014 and were immediately applied. So far, nearly 20 people have been convicted of joining and participating in foreign terrorist organisations, and an additional 25 are currently under investigation. As a result, the number of departures of our citizens to foreign conflict zones fell to 0 in 2016. According to the information that we receive from our intelligence services, the trend is the same over the first 4 months of 2017, and there have been no new departures from Bosnia and Herzegovina to the foreign battlegrounds. Finally, let me say that Bosnia and Herzegovina, as an active member of the anti-terrorist and anti-ISIS coalition, will continue to fulfill its international commitments and contribute to global efforts in combating all forms of terrorist threats and related criminal activities to the extent of our capacities. In this regard, we will welcome, support, and actively contribute to the implementation of any outcomes of this conference aimed at further strengthening our mutual cooperation in preventing and combating violent extremism, radicalism, and terrorism. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. This concludes the opening segment of this conference. I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers who have intervened so far for their interesting and thought-provoking presentations. I'm sure that they will contribute to generating a lively debate in the course of this conference. Let me now invite you all to have coffee in the Forzal, just outside here. I kindly ask you to be back at 11:30 sharp, when the first session dedicated to national experiences and international cooperation in countering terrorism will start.